When Rose's secretary bragged to my face for the 19th time, I still couldn't be bothered to pay him any attention. He ran out of tricks, threw down a hospital report in front of me as a threat. I calmly told him, if there's an issue, see your doctor. Take care of yourself. He lost his cool and asked me, how long are you going to keep acting like a turtle hiding in its shell? It's funny, he just doesn't get it. Competing for a partner lost its thrill for me long ago. It's the business resources that are interesting. Rose probably heard some rumors. She rarely interrupts my work, but today she pushed open my office door during work hours, acting casual as she placed an iced Americano on my desk. She put on a fake air as she said, your favorite. Without even a glance, I tossed the condensation-coated iced coffee into the trash beside my feet. Just as her expression began to crumble, I picked up the thermos from the other side of the desk and chuckled. Too old for that icy stuff now. Back in the years when we started the business together, I did have a morning habit of an iced Americano. It was necessary to be up early, full of energy to go out and get business. My body was running on overdrive, needing that caffeine jolt from one iced coffee after another. At that time, she handled the products and management while I opened new markets. We were the lovey-dovey couple team in the industry. It was tough, but full of hope. Even eating instant noodles around a foldable table in a rented apartment was a joy. Buying me that coffee was one of the small ways she showed she cared whenever she saw me off each day. Drinking the iced coffee she bought, I could run around all day without feeling tired. With a partner by my side and a blossoming career, life felt unbeatable. When did it start to go wrong? Probably 3 years ago at that business party. I had to leave midway due to a stomachache, and Rose chose to stay, asking the driver to take me home while she swapped drinks with people. Before then, I was always her top priority. It wasn't just any trivial party. Even the most important client didn't matter more than my well-being. She once destroyed a deal we had worked 6 months on just to stop a client from making me drink too much. That loss was in the millions, but she comforted me, saying, even $1 billion isn't worth comparing to your health. But people change. Later, I wasn't even worthy of competing with an ordinary social event. Our circle has many other couples who started businesses like us. After making it big, the story is the same. Young lovers who fought side by side become insignificant in the end. Sometimes our friends, after a night of celebration, would sigh in the quiet afterwards saying, just enjoy the ride, since the ending is always like this. But that kind of ending doesn't justify my journey full of ups and downs. That day, alone in the back seat of a luxury car, I realized that the only thing worth giving my all for was myself. I swapped the cold coffee for herbal tea, moved unavoidable social gatherings to tea rooms. Doing it made me realize it wasn't that hard. I could still seal deals with tea in hand. Maybe it's because the business wasn't affected that Rose never noticed these changes. Right now, there was a rare flicker of guilt in her deep eyes as she rubbed my shoulders and whispered in my ear, sorry, I've been careless. What are you referring to? I asked with genuine curiosity. Being smart, she quickly caught on to the sarcasm in my words and turned. Leaning against my desk, looking down at me, Tony didn't know when to stop. I've already fired him. I nodded non-committally. To be honest, I knew it all along. She chose to stay at that party rather than come home with me because Tony was there. He was the nephew of a company partner, freshly returned from studying abroad, hoping to land a cushy job through connections. None of this mattered. When restructuring the company, I specifically allocated budget and positions for these kinds of connections. Those folks, though not really working, serve as vital links maintaining our business relationships. But Tony was different. He looked a lot like Rose's college crush. She kept him as her chief secretary. Her explanation was that every CEO of the same level had some eye candy around. Wanting to blend in, she would follow customs. Tony was handsome, well-educated, and a perfect fit, but she swore she'd never cross the line. She'd never forget where her home was. Back then, I knocked my thermos bottle filled with herbal tea, allowing her to test her limits. And now, with her eye candy so brazenly trying to take over my spot, I wanted to see what excuse she'd give. When I didn't help her out of the situation, she paused and continued, In a way, it's your fault. I raised an eyebrow. How's that? Aren't I the charming woman you molded? She teased, locking her eyes onto mine with a smile. I remembered last year when a finance magazine called her one of the most charming women in the industry. During that interview, she credited me, saying, "It's all thanks to my husband." For days, I lost my appetite, but she delighted in her own humor. Smiling, she placed her hand over mine, her voice turning serious. "The kid has his head full of romance, saying he only likes a woman like me. I turned him down many times. I didn't think he'd be foolish enough to pull this stunt while I was drunk and then come to you with nonsense. It's too ridiculous. I've given him some money to clean up the mess." Tony, young and in front of her, played the role of a sincere, love-struck boy. I once heard him tearfully tell Rose he didn't care about her wealth, just her, and would be with her even if she didn't have a penny. And she, despite her age, honestly believed that her charms alone had captivated this young man, rather than her CEO status. This was entirely inappropriate. I looked at her for a long moment before I finally put on a proper smile and said, "As long as you've handled it." Rose exhaled deeply and began gossiping about other CEOs' affairs. Sam's 3 lovers lived in the same neighborhood but different buildings. Maria recently set up a new company with a management team full of her partners. Lee directly brought his illegitimate child home to raise. Basically, what you're saying is this kind of thing happens all the time, no matter who you are. Let's be real, not even the department managers at the company are clean. Compared to them, she's actually a role model of coming out of the mud unstained. This was just a little accident, right? Watching her shamelessly try to brainwash me. My mind was filled with the image of getting up, grabbing her by the hair, and slamming her face into the desk. I really wanted to mess up her well-maintained, chiseled face. When I was younger, I thought anyone who looked that good must be right about everything. But now, listening to her nonsense, all I felt was a constant wave of disgust. She's forgotten I'm not that naive kid from years ago. I've seen more manipulation and dark dealings than she can imagine. If she'd just admit she likes Tony's face and wants him around, I'd actually respect her a bit. After all, like she said, this kind of stuff happens all the time in our world. Back when I started with her, my head was in the clouds, but I got over that. If the price was right, I'd divorce her and let someone else have my place. But here we are, and she's still trying to smooth things over with her looks and words, like when she talked me into investing in her startup. It's too much. Way too much. She knows I can be smooth and tolerant, but there's one thing I can't stand. Looking at the photos in my phone of Tony lounging and having tea at the mountainside villa, my expression stayed calm as I saw Rose off. Then I sent Joey, my assistant, a voice message to find out who actually owns that villa. Perched on the mountainside, it has great views and feng shui. I personally selected and furnished it after the company went public, intending it for retirement with Rose. When Tony showed off those suggestive marks on his neck, hinting they came from Rose at work, I put that villa up for sale. The agent mentioned the buyer was an out-of-town businessman. At that time, I was on a trip abroad, so I didn't ask many questions and left the whole thing to them. Months later, seeing that villa again in Tony's photos shocked me. Familiar decor, a unique viewpoint. It was the place I'd poured my heart into imagining a future. Rose can have a fling. I don't care much. But if she's secretly buying a villa where I plan to spend our retirement to maintain her fling, I care a lot. Tony began retracting the photos as if I hadn't already seen them all. Too bad, the first one couldn't be taken back after 2 minutes. He dared to send an audio message. "Sorry, Dave, wrong send." When I didn't respond, he continued. "Rose bought the retirement house to gift it to me. Such a great house needs me to live in it. You're used to hardships. Breathing in city pollution suits you. By the way, you're so calm and tolerant. I bet none of this even bothers you. Does it?" Each clip was carefully timed under 2 minutes so I could hear them, but there was no evidence left. I almost told him about Rose's plan to ask him to get an abortion, just to throw him off a bit, but then I thought it wasn't worth it. Let her jump around. I have way more important things to deal with every single day. On the last day of each month, I always pick up my daughter from her international school for a weekend at home. This time, I parked as usual, but saw Tony, holding a cake, approach my daughter Nancy first. The scene felt too familiar. I nearly stumbled when stepping out of the car. My eyes welled up, and I ran towards them like a madman. 20 years ago, on a similar day, a man stopped me after school, claiming he was a friend of my mom's, with lots of treats for me. He understood middle schoolers' hearts and easily became my brother. We became close, meeting frequently at the school gate. Once, he invited me to his child's birthday. My dad was there too. I felt something was off and wanted to leave, but the man kept insisting my mom was a great help to him, so I stayed for cake and candles. When I returned home, my dad had jumped from the rooftop. His phone on the rooftop captured a picture of us singing and celebrating, me facing away with the man's arm over my shoulders. My mom held his child in a scene like a happy family of 4. That photo became my dad's death sentence and my lifelong nightmare. I ran over, shielding Nancy, accusing Tony, "What are you doing here?" With a sly smile, "Rose treats me well, so I'm just checking in on her daughter. Nothing wrong with that." He tried to pull Nancy from me, saying they're close. His smug eyes filled with unspeakable malice. All this time, his antics never bothered me, but messing with my child had me shaking with anger. I just wanted to get Nancy home, then deal with him. Unexpectedly, Nancy stepped forward herself, staring at Tony. "Are you my mom's boy toy?" Tony froze awkwardly. "Don't be so nasty. If it's nasty, don't do it. If you do, hide away instead of parading around embarrassing yourself," she said. Faced with Nancy's fierce words, Tony dropped the pretense. He coldly chuckled. "What do you know? When women don't have money, they marry for usefulness. Real love comes later when they're rich. I'm your mom's real love." Nancy rolled her eyes. "So what? What do you want? Trying to mess with my dad?" "Huh? Don't bother. I've seen it all before, even if I haven't lived it. Just like my mom's little toy. My dad doesn't even care, and you're strutting around." Every morning, Nancy is the loudest reader in class. Her fast-talking comments draw a crowd of classmates and parents. I've learned quite a bit about today's middle schoolers. They're all like little adults, not just smart but also quick-witted. They pointed at Tony, full of opinions. How dare his mistress show her face? My dad's side piece would never. She avoids us entirely. My family's one is better looking and better behaved. Nancy, your mom doesn't have good taste. Nancy stomped her foot angrily, yelling at Tony. "Look at you making a fool of yourself." Tony was trapped in the crowd, his face red with embarrassment, unable to escape. He wished he could just disappear. Suddenly, someone pushed through the crowd. When Tony saw Rose, he looked relieved. "I was just passing by. You all ganging up on me. Isn't that a bit much?" The group of kids fired back. "So what if we're bullying you? Should we schedule it or something?" "Yeah, didn't you bring it on yourself? If this counts as bullying, then I'm bullying every day." "Same here. I'll be the hero fighting evil." The kids did the talking while the parents nodded in agreement from the back. Tony tried to edge towards Rose discreetly. They all know each other in this circle, so some details are known. 2 parents who knew me gave me a look and started urging everyone to disperse. After the crowd left, Rose busied herself comforting Tony, looking a bit guilty. "I told you, Nancy is my boundary. No matter what, she should never be involved. Back then, she promised me. I'll never let history repeat itself." I believed her because she understood my pain and wanted to protect my heart's defenses. In college, a classmate lost it when her parents got divorced over an affair. Everyone tried to comfort her. Rose, on the other hand, got me out right away so I wouldn't hear about it. We took a week off to go biking, and that's when we started dating. I thought if I could trust one woman in this world, it was her. But now, here's Tony crossing all my lines. Is this just how every ambitious partner thinks? Or did he know about my past? And if he knows, who told him? I didn't want to think too much about it, so I took Nancy's hand and left without looking back. Nancy, on the other hand, couldn't help but shout at her mom. This guy embarrassed me in front of everyone. On the way back, I watched Nancy through the rearview mirror, worried today's events might have left a mark on her. She noticed and reassured me. Dad, relax. I'm not as fragile as you think. And also, I'll always be on your side. My heart lightened. That's great. Nancy's got it more together than I did at her age. If only I'd seen through the deception earlier, maybe I wouldn't have lost my mom. She puffed up with pride. Of course, each generation is better than the last. Her bright eyes in the mirror urged me on. It's time to move forward. The worries I've had don't even exist. So I don't have to be lenient with Rose anymore. After spending the weekend with Nancy, I planned to confront Rose. But when I got to the parking garage, I saw her car there too. We both have the same car, only a digit apart in license plates. It was a surprise for our 10th wedding anniversary. How unfortunate. I patted the car's hood, realizing it might soon be on the market. At home, Rose awaited, greeting me warmly. She even cooked all my favorite dishes. She sat me down at the table, raised her wine glass, and said, "Tony has been dealt with. He won't show up again." I apologize for my negligence in all this. Seemed like genuine regret, but was it really just negligence? My phone chimed. Joey, my assistant, sent a message. "Dave, we found out the real buyer for the villa was Tony's Aunt Sandy, the one who brought him into the company." Rose held my hand, pleading, "For Nancy's sake, forgive me this time. You don't want her to lose a complete family, do you? Like you did at a young age." Bringing up Nancy and memories of my past made my heart skip a beat. I refrained from taking out the divorce papers I had in my bag. Dinner with Rose was pleasant, reminding me of old times. She reminisced every detail of our past, recalling every cherished memory. She said she'll never forget. I nodded, pretending to be moved. But as I reached the bedroom and saw the new sheets and gifts, I silently closed the door. For years, we've slept separately, only visiting when needed. Rose had insisted I check out her new setup today. Just goes to show she'd planned something special. Rose surprised me by hugging me from behind, softly whispering, "Babe, it's been a while since we've been together. Aren't you tempted?" Her fingers traced circles on my chest, hinting at what she wanted. I closed my eyes, saying softly, "It's not convenient today." She knows my health isn't what it used to be, despite all efforts to improve. She reluctantly released me, saying, "Maybe another time." That night, I slept soundly. The next morning, Rose and I drove separate cars to work. Everything felt like it used to, except while we usually arrived one after another, this time I waited 10 minutes in the garage, and she still hadn't arrived. I stopped waiting, strolled into the elevator, and pressed the button for the office floor. But stepping out, I found Tony waiting there. He seemed ready for a new chapter, only to face me, the one person he didn't expect. His eyes widened as he blurted, "How are you still here?" With a smile, I replied, "This is my company. Why wouldn't I be here?" His face changed, a mix of emotions crossing his features. "But you'd better not run around," he said as he raised his foot to leave. Tony reacted like a cat when its tail gets stomped on. He grabbed my arm and angrily whispered in my ear, "Rose lied to you. She promised I'd have a good life, safe and healthy. She even said she'd help me take over the company and achieve my dreams. As for you, you should end up like your father." He didn't finish his sentence, but the cruel smile on his face was provocative. I smiled back, calmly answering a phone call. Then, I looked right into Tony's eyes and feigned surprise over the phone. "What did you say? Rose had an accident? Someone tampered with her brakes? Is she okay?" With every word I spoke, Tony's face grew more and more ashen. Finally, as I hung up the call, he turned and ran away. I glanced at Joey, who had been standing not far away, then leisurely headed to the hospital. In this world, only Joey knew. When Tony started making those outrageous demands, I'd set up surveillance in both Rose's office and in her fancy bags she always carried around. I heard clearly how despicable the two of them were in private. I also knew Rose never wanted a divorce. She wanted both her gentle husband and the brother she could manipulate. But Tony was ambitious. He constantly wanted to replace me. After that incident, to smooth things over, Rose gave Tony a chunk of money to chase his dreams in another city. She promised to visit him regularly. Tony thought he had things all figured out, unaware that he lost all hope and made a decision. If he couldn't have them divorce, he'd physically destroy them. He pleaded with his Aunt Sandy for one last favor. After all, since he'd known Rose, he'd steered quite a bit of business her way. So Sandy agreed to help him mess with my car. Having known everything long beforehand, I wouldn't just sit still. Rose and I had matching cars and parked them together. Back when we were close, we often swapped cars. Since we made up last night, Rose was happy to let me drive her car, even jokingly challenging me to see whose driving skills were better, who could reach the office first. So the one in the ER now was her, not me. When I got there, Rose was out of danger, but both her legs were broken, so she'd be in a wheelchair for life. When she saw me, she almost cried out, reaching shakily for a hug. I shook my head and slipped the divorce papers, which I hadn't had a chance to give her last night, into her hands. "Are you joking?" she asked, voice trembling, looking at the papers. I knew this was harsh, but it was what she deserved. "How can you leave me at a time like this after all we've been through? Weren't you the one who betrayed us first?" I nodded toward Tony, who was standing silhouetted against the door. She closed her eyes, voice quivering. "Dave, I just didn't have the heart to make a young person give up his dreams. I know I wronged you and I tried to make up for it. Can't you be more forgiving? Back in the day, afraid to hurt my feelings, you wouldn't even let me hear about similar cases among my classmates. And now I'm blamed for not being forgiving? It's funny how people laugh when they're speechless." So I laughed and said, "I'm petty. I'm setting you free to find someone who's more forgiving." "Dave, I can't believe you'd turn out like this." Tony came in at just the right moment, pointing at me indignantly. "Rose didn't want to hurt you, so she let me suffer, and this is how you treat her? Are you even human?" Then he turned and threw himself onto Rose, wrapping his arms tightly around her. "I promised no matter what, even if you lost an arm or a leg or were penniless, I wouldn't leave you, and I meant it." Rose looked at me, but when I didn't budge, she finally lowered her gaze to Tony in her arms and gave a sigh. "Fool." Watching her go from shock to gratitude, hugging her fool, I clapped. "How touching. Now sign the divorce papers." At my words, Tony shot up. "Fine, I'll sign. You're the one not worthy to stand by Rose's side." He snatched the divorce papers from my hand, grabbed a pen, and thrust it into Rose's hand, soothing her. "Sign them. You have me and our dreams." Rose looked over them and, seeing nothing unfair, quickly signed. When she handed them to me, her eyes were red, and she gritted her teeth. "Dave, you'll regret this." "Regret? Not happening. If anyone regrets it, it will be her." As soon as I got the divorce papers, I rushed to finish the property division. Rose, to ensure my shares didn't fall into the hands of other shareholders, splurged her entire fortune to buy them. So now the company was all hers. Tony, acting like he owned the place, moved into my old office with much pomp. He immediately initiated drastic reforms, cutting many benefits, which led to massive employee dissatisfaction and even caused backlash online due to his strict management. The internet was mocking him as an incompetent office manager. But instead of reflecting, he gathered all employees for a meeting and publicly condemned me for divorcing Rose as soon as she had her accident, leaving her. He said I started another company and took many clients away. And because Rose wanted to save the company, she went into debt to buy the other half of the shares. Now she owns nothing but this company. I believe my employees are nothing like Dave, heartless and selfish. We'll get through this together with the company, right? I heard that after her passionate speech, nobody in the audience responded. It was so awkward you could probably build a mansion just from the toe-curling embarrassment. Joey couldn't stop laughing when gossiping with me. Don't these employees need to make a living? He seems to think everyone eats off the boss himself every day. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, watching the sunset, and calmly replied, "Don't worry, her show is about to crumble." Joey couldn't hold back. "Get on with it, boss. I've had enough." Actually, I registered this company in a friend's name doing freelance work about 3 years ago. Over these years, it has grown quite a bit. Rose's early clients were all brought in by me, and it was me maintaining those relationships. People weren't loyal to the company, they were loyal to me. After the divorce, it was only natural that those clients openly moved to my side. The ones who haven't yet will eventually. Tony thinks he can conquer the world by conquering women. But I've been doing it on my own from the start. I don't snatch women. If I snatch anything, it's business opportunities. As of now, there's only one big client left, Sandy's C Group. But she doesn't even have the power to get her nephew into their own group, so her influence can't be that strong. I sent the purchasing records of the Hillside Villa and the evidence of Sandy tampering with my car to her husband, Jimmy. Sandy, with her CEO title, has strutted around for years. Tony couldn't even get into his aunt's company after studying abroad, so it seems he isn't well favored by his uncle. Jimmy's son is now an adult. I think he's looking for a good opportunity to prove himself. 3 days later, he reached out to me. Jimmy, exuding class, said to me first thing, "I've already kicked Sandy out. From now on, the group will be managed by my son." He said, "In the future, please take care." I handed him a freshly brewed cup of tea, smiling gently, "Pleasure doing business with you." Before leaving, he asked why, with evidence of Sandy and Tony's crimes, I didn't just hand it over to bring them to justice. Tony had a history of bullying classmates from an early age, with Sandy suppressing complaints from parents. When it got out of hand, they sent him abroad. She turned a blind eye for years. She's had enough. I thought for a moment and smiled helplessly. The recording isn't admissible. The garage's monitoring records were deliberately damaged and haven't been fixed yet, but eventually they will be. Another business cocktail party. I attended all dressed up, only to run into Tony pushing Rose in a wheelchair at the entrance. Everyone else was there to network, but the two of them were seeking partnerships. The result, unsurprisingly, was a bitter one. Tony's antics are already an industry joke. My company, on the other hand, is thriving with the same products. Anyone sensible would choose to work with me over a company on the verge of collapse. Even their employees are resigning and coming to work for me now. Now Rose, clinging to a failing company and unable to walk, only has Tony's undying love as her bargaining chip. I'm curious how long Tony's patience will last. Unexpectedly, before the party ended, I overheard them arguing in the corridor at the back of the banquet hall. They managed to get tickets to the party by calling in favors and spending money. After struggling to mingle with smiling faces, all they received were polite dismissals. Tony had enough and wanted to leave, but Rose needed to use the restroom and needed his help. Fed up, Tony finally lost his patience and started arguing with Rose. He yelled at her for being useless, not being able to secure clients or make money, and even needing help to use the bathroom. Yelling hysterically in the crowded corridor, he screamed, "Why should I suffer with you? I've had enough." In recent days, thanks to his brilliant leadership, the company's partners have all left, and most employees have jumped ship. Once promising, K Group is now a lifeless shell. Even sitting in my old office doesn't give him any sense of superiority now. As for being a charming older man, sure, when you're wealthy, but with no money and a broken leg, it's understandable he's struggling. Rose, in a wheelchair enduring the awkward glances from passers-by, looked up with tear-filled eyes and quivered. "Didn't you say you'd never leave me no matter if I was crippled or penniless?" Tony forced a smile. "Sorry, I lied. I'm not your Dave. I just wanted an easy ride. I've done enough being with you this long." He turned to leave. Rose shouted, "What about all those years?" Tony didn't turn back. "I'll forget them." His voice was icy, his retreat without the slightest hesitation. Rose stared in a daze as he disappeared down the hall, her body trembling. I sighed, signaled a server to take her to the restroom, and planned my quick exit. But she spotted me, calling loudly, "Dave, is that you? I know it's you. Look back at me. Look." But I didn't want to turn back. Those who betray true feelings deserve 1,000 needles. But I never liked seeing people swallow needles. Just like over 10 years ago when my mom happily remarried. She took that man and his child to hike a wild mountain. A storm hit, and the three of them fell to their deaths. Relatives asked me to see them off, just to witness their karma. But I refused. Even one more look would have dirted my eyes. Unfortunately, my ears still got tainted. Among Rose's desperate calls, I heard a server curse quietly. There was a commotion in the hallway. People hurried away. I heard a passerby say someone had fallen out of a wheelchair and wet their pants. The hallway reeked of urine, forcing the party to end early. But I wouldn't turn back. Since my dad left, I've thought about one thing every day. If I face a similar situation in the future, how would I handle it? First, I'd never give up my career to care for a child. Second, if a partner strays, I'd strike back decisively rather than self-destruct. If my strength isn't enough, I'd bide my time then strike when strong enough. No matter what tactics are used, I won't dance to anyone else's tune. I'll always move to my rhythm. Finally, I won't let anyone who wrongs me go unpunished. The hillside villa was reclaimed and sold. Now Tony, apart from the money Rose transferred over time, has nothing. But he quickly found a new target, a wealthy schoolmate who returned from abroad. He spruced himself up, full of confidence, to attend a class reunion, aiming to win her over. Coincidentally, that's when I shared the footage from my garage cameras. The police promptly arrested the perpetrator. That person quickly confessed to being hired by Sandy. Sandy, in turn, admitted to being instructed by Tony. Then, while Tony was at the reunion trying to charm his way into his wealthy classmates' lives, the police barged in and cuffed him, taking him away. His classmate was quite frightened and threatened to sue Tony for emotional distress. But that may have to wait until Tony's released. As for Rose, she tried selling the company to pay off debts, but there were no takers. She did visit me a few times, but I had given strict instructions. Joey was also screening, so she couldn't even get through the door of my company. Eventually, she closed shop with a mountain of debt, resorting to drinking daily and dodging creditors. I told Nancy if she wanted to help Rose with her own money, I wouldn't object. But I wouldn't offer a cent myself. Nancy cried, saying she wouldn't. She couldn't forgive anyone who hurt her dad. I was relieved and turned my focus entirely on my work. Except during Nancy's holidays, when I'd put everything aside to take her on vacations and relax myself. Our lives are full, happy, and fortunate. Until one day, Joey sent me a news clip. It said someone in a wheelchair had embraced a just-released prisoner at the prison gate and set themselves on fire. The news ended saying the truth behind the suspected past grievances between them was under investigation. Actually, I'm thankful every day for having a daughter. Though I can't bring my dad back, I can extend the love he gave me.